August 1945. The war had ended, but for the Japanese women crammed into the back of an Allied transport truck, it didn't feel like victory or surrender, just silence. The road wound through scorched palm trees and the smell of rusted oil drums. They sat shoulder to shoulder, eyes hollow, uniforms torn, clutching what little remained of their past. One of them whispered, "They'll make us pay." Another replied, "If we're lucky, quickly." But when the gates opened, the unthinkable happened. They weren't beaten. The Allied guards stood still, rifles down, no shouting, no chaos, just clipped orders, step down, form two lines. The women hesitated. They expected kicks, humiliation, maybe execution. Instead, a British sergeant merely pointed to a row of tents. His expression wasn't anger. It was procedure. The quiet unnerved them more than any threat. Each step onto that dusty ground felt surreal. Reports later noted over 4,000 Japanese women were taken captive across Southeast Asia that year. Nurses, clerks, radio operators, even civilian volunteers. Most had been told they'd never see mercy from the enemy. In their training, surrender was worse than death. Now that very enemy was guiding them toward food and shelter. The paradox was unbearable. A young prisoner, her name recorded as Sergeant Tanaka, glanced at the guard's boots. "They don't even look at us," she murmured. Another woman spat on the ground, furious. "It's a trick. They'll break us slower." But the only sound was the clatter of the gate locking behind them. One medic, barely 20, offered them canteens. The women stared as if it were poison. "You'll need it," he said softly, not waiting for thanks. Later that night, when Tanaka lay awake, she replayed that toe. It wasn't mockery, it was duty, and that confused her more than cruelty ever could. By dawn, they were ordered to assemble again. An officer read a single word from a clipboard, "Bathe." Steam hissed from a row of bathhouses nearby, wooden doors creaking open. The women froze, unsure if this was cleansing or punishment. Tomorrow they would learn it was both. The morning sun hit like judgment. The women stood in rigid lines, sweat dripping through their tattered khaki uniforms. A loudspeaker crackled overhead one word, clear and foreign, "Bathe." Some flinched as if struck. Others whispered, confused, "Bathe together." The order echoed through the camp again, followed by the rhythmic hiss of water pipes heating up. They'd heard rumors that Western soldiers used showers as punishment, sometimes worse. Every instinct screamed, "Don't trust this." But guards didn't raise their rifles. Instead, they motioned calmly toward a long wooden structure built from salvaged bamboo and tin. The steam pouring out gave it a ghostly look, like the spirit of the battlefield itself. In Japanese military culture, dirt was a badge of loyalty. During combat, soldiers rarely washed. Purity meant sacrifice. Here, being clean suddenly meant obedience. One prisoner muttered, "This is how they erase us." Another, a nurse named Keiko, tried to translate a medic's English, "hygiene for health." It sounded like a foreign concept, kindness as policy. Inside the bathhouse, confusion thickened like the humidity. Altogether, the Allied nurse repeated firmly, "No screens, no partitions, no ranks, just 20 women, stripped of everything that once defined them." The floorboards were slick with soap and shame. Allied medical protocols from that period demanded compulsory group hygiene twice a week, a defense against dysentery and lice outbreaks that had killed thousands in earlier camps. To the Japanese POW, though, this wasn't sanitation. It was exposure. Their dignity peeled away with every drop of water. One woman refused to undress. The nurse didn't force her. She simply said, "Rules are rules," and stepped aside. That gentleness felt more humiliating than cruelty. "They treat us like people," Keiko whispered, trembling. "But we're not supposed to be." From the corner, an Allied guard stood silently. He looked young, barely 20. When one towel slipped, he turned his head sharply away. No sneer, no smirk, just discomfort. And that single human gesture detonated something inside the room. For the first time, the women saw weakness not in themselves, but in their captors too. Steam rose higher, curling through light shafts like smoke after surrender. Tomorrow, that one glance would change everything. The water hit the floorboards in steady rhythm, drip, splash, hiss. 20 Japanese women stood inside the bathhouse, the steam curling around them like fog after a bombardment. Every breath tasted of metal and soap. The order had been clear altogether, no partitions, no curtains. Just stripped down uniformity in the most literal sense. Keiko clenched her fists, trying to cover herself, but there was nowhere to hide. The Allied nurse moved through the mist with calm authority, handing each woman a small bar of carbolic soap. "Clean thoroughly," she said in a voice that wasn't cruel but clinical. That tone, detached, professional, felt worse than mockery. The Japanese women were used to hate. Indifference broke them differently. In Tokyo's code, purity came from pain. Here, the enemy was forcing them to wash in peace. Their sense of honor, already fractured by capture, felt stripped raw. Some cried silently, others scrubbed as if punishment lay in the act itself. The sound of water slapping wood mixed with muffled sobs, an orchestra of humiliation. Internal Allied reports later noted that 27% of female Japanese POW resisted initial hygiene orders, interpreting them as degradation rituals. But the medics weren't mocking, they were preventing epidemics. The clash wasn't physical, it was cultural, moral, invisible. From the far corner, the young British guard stood watch, rifle lowered. He wasn't leering, his eyes stayed fixed on the opposite wall. Sweat rolled down his temples. When one of the women dropped her towel and froze, expecting laughter, he did something no one anticipated. He looked away. Slowly, deliberately, that single gesture rippled across the room like shockwave. The nurse followed his lead, adjusting her clipboard, eyes down. No one spoke, no one smirked. The silence transformed shame into something new. Confusion, perhaps even respect. Keiko noticed it first. "They don't see us as trophies," she whispered. "They see us as people." The words felt dangerous. She bit them back, but the thought refused to die. When the session ended, the women stepped outside, clothes clinging to their skin. The air smelled of wet bamboo and burned diesel. Somewhere beyond the fence, a supply truck rumbled in. Tomorrow's ration delivery, they said, but inside that truck waited another shock, one far sweeter and far harder to swallow. The next morning dawned grey and heavy, as if the sky itself was uncertain what to make of yesterday. The women lined up outside their tents, uniforms still damp from the bath. The camp was quiet, too quiet. A British sergeant read out roll call, his accent sharp and clipped. But there was no anger, no dominance. Just the hum of order. Inside the mess hall, steam rose again, this time from breakfast pots instead of bath pipes. Rice mixed with canned beans, something sweet in the air. The women hesitated, remembering the young guard who had turned his eyes away. His gesture had unsettled them, not because it was kind, but because it broke the script. They'd been trained to believe the enemy was monstrous. "But monsters don't blush, monsters don't look away," one nurse whispered. "He couldn't even stand to see us ashamed." Another replied, "Maybe that's the punishment, making us feel human again." That thought lingered like smoke. Allied command had, in fact, issued new decency directives across several camps after reports of emotional breakdowns among captured nurses and female auxiliaries. The order: guards must maintain distance, minimize contact, and treat female POW as protected persons under the laws of war. For the women, those words translated into something stranger, an unexpected safety. Still, trust didn't come easy. When an Allied medic passed by offering clean towels, one prisoner flinched so hard she dropped hers. He froze, then nodded, no apology, no pity, just acknowledgement. That tiny transaction carried more impact than speeches ever could. Later, while washing dishes under the guard tower's shadow, Keiko caught a glimpse of that same young sentry again. His face was sunburned, expression unreadable. But this time she met his eyes and didn't look away. Two worlds, separated by war, paused for a fraction of a second. and something cracked between them. When night fell, word spread that new rations had arrived. The women whispered rumors, maybe extra rice, maybe soap. But when the tins opened, they found something they'd never expected from their captors, something that would rattle their pride far deeper than any command. The clang of metal tins echoed through the mess line. Steam rose in soft curls, carrying the strange mix of rice, beans, and something sugary. The women shuffled forward silently, tin bowls in hand, each expecting the taste of humiliation. But when they reached the serving table, they froze. Atop each meal tray lay a small, square bar of chocolate, Allied chocolate, smooth, foreign, impossible. For a heartbeat, no one moved, then Keiko whispered, "It's a mistake," but it wasn't. The cook, a middle-aged American corporal with oil-stained hands, just smiled faintly and said, "Eat before it melts." The women exchanged wary glances. Chocolate was rationed even among Allied civilians. In 1945, many soldiers hadn't seen one in months. Yet here it was offered to prisoners. A British report from that same period noted Allied POW rations averaging 800 calories per day, nearly double what many Japanese civilians were receiving that year. The logic was pragmatic. Healthy prisoners caused fewer problems, but to the captured women this generosity felt like mockery. "We are their enemies," one woman thought bitterly. "Why do they feed us like children?" When Keiko bit into the chocolate, the taste hit like a betrayal. Sweet, creamy, alien, her eyes stung. She had nursed wounded men who died screaming for water, yet here she was tasting luxury from the same side that had destroyed her country. "They want us to forget who we are," she muttered. But deep inside, another voice whispered, "Or remember what we were before the war." Not everyone could bear it. One woman, Lieutenant Nakamura, hid her bar under her cot, wrapped in cloth. Proof, she said to herself, that kindness always hides a blade. That night, the smell of cocoa filled the barracks, a haunting symbol of contradiction. Enemy hands feeding the defeated. Outside, under the moonlight, the young British guard from the bathhouse smoked quietly by the fence, watching shadows move behind canvas walls. He saw one silhouette, the woman with the hidden chocolate kneeling beside her cot. He didn't know it, but that secret would soon reveal just how deep the psychological war between mercy and mistrust could go. Tomorrow an inspection would uncover it, and instead of punishment, something far stranger would happen. Night in the camp was never truly silent. The crickets sang over the low hum of diesel generators, and somewhere, boots crunched against gravel in slow patrol rhythm. Inside Tent 14, Lieutenant Nakamura lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling canvas, her hand resting beneath her cot where the chocolate bar was hidden. That little piece of sweetness felt radioactive, too soft, too dangerous, too human. She wasn't hungry. She was waiting for the punishment that surely had to come. In her mind, this had to be a trap, a test of obedience, a way to expose weak loyalty. The Japanese army had drilled one truth into her: compassion from the enemy was camouflage. She repeated it like a mantra. They want to see what breaks us first. But the next morning, when the Allied officer made rounds, he stopped at her tent, looked down at the folded blanket, and saw the small, crumpled wrapper peeking out. Nakamura froze. The entire barrack held its breath. Instead of shouting, the officer crouched, picked up the chocolate carefully, and left a small folded note in its place. No guards, no raised voices, just a quiet nod as he walked out. Hours later, she unfolded the paper. 4 words written in rough pencil, "Save it for tomorrow." That was all, no sarcasm, no reprimand. She read it again, over and over, until the words blurred. Reports from 1946 show that American-run POW camps recorded 0 executions for food hoarding or defiance, a stunning reversal from Japanese military discipline, where even small disobedience meant death. Mercy was policy now, and for Nakamura, that mercy was more terrifying than punishment. That night, she shared half the bar with Keiko, whispering, They treat us like people. Why? Keiko had no answer. The sweetness on their tongues felt heavier than guilt. Outside, rain began to fall, soaking the parade ground. The British guard, the same one who'd turned away in the bathhouse, watched the women's tents glisten under the lamps. He saw no rebellion, no hatred, just quiet exhaustion. But tomorrow, the peace would shift again. Medical officers were coming for inspections, and even kindness could feel like another invasion. Rain hammered the tin roof as dawn broke. A loudspeaker crackled again, this time announcing medical inspection, mandatory attendance. The words sent a tremor through the camp. To the Allied staff, it was routine. To the Japanese women, it sounded like violation dressed as mercy. They'd already been stripped once. Now again, inside the infirmary tent, rows of cots gleamed under weak light. Metal instruments clinked softly, thermometers, stethoscopes, blood pressure cuffs. For the women who'd grown up under an army that punished illness as weakness, the smell of disinfectant triggered dread. Keiko whispered, "They'll examine us like animals." Nakamura stared straight ahead, her face blank but her fingers trembling. Then something unexpected happened. The inspectors weren't men. 3 Allied female nurses stepped forward, crisp uniforms pressed, expressions calm. Their orders were clear: no physical contact without consent. One nurse smiled, a brief flicker of humanity breaking through protocol. "We check for fever, nothing more," she said slowly, careful with each word. The first thermometer touched skin. The women flinched, no shouting followed, no mocking, just quiet note-taking, each reading logged, each symptom recorded. Records from Allied archives show that over 70% of Japanese female POW suffered from malaria, lice, or severe malnutrition. Camp medics treated them meticulously, doses tracked, progress graphed. For the captives, this attention felt alien. The idea that the enemy cared whether they lived was harder to bear than cruelty. Keiko watched one nurse, an Australian with sunburned arms, gently dab iodine on a prisoner's cut. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. The question broke something open. The woman nodded, tears mixing with antiseptic. No soldier had ever asked if pain hurt. The nurses moved like ghosts, efficient, wordless, respectful. Outside, thunder rolled. When it was over, the prisoners sat in silence, bandaged and confused. Nakamura finally whispered, "They heal us while we still hate them." Keiko didn't reply. She didn't need to. As they left the tent, a clerk handed each woman an envelope marked censored correspondence. "Letters from home," he said. The words froze them mid-step. Home was a place that might no longer exist. And as one letter began with the word Nagasaki, the ground beneath them seemed to vanish. The paper felt thinner than air, edges trembling in the women's hands. Each envelope was stamped, examined by Allied censor, a small red mark that somehow carried the weight of an empire. They hadn't seen handwriting from home in over a year. Some clutched the letters without opening them, fearful that the words inside would destroy the small illusions keeping them alive. Keiko unfolded hers first. The ink had bled from humidity, but she could still write her mother's name. The letter was dated early August 1945, from Nagasaki. Her pulse quickened. The translator, a young British corporal fluent in Japanese, approached with hesitant courtesy. "I can help," he said. She nodded, unable to speak. He began reading softly. The letter spoke of rice shortages, air raids, and hope that the war will soon end. Then, halfway down the page, his voice faltered. The date was August 7, 2 days before the atomic blast. His next words cracked through the tent like thunder. "Your home may no longer stand." The entire group froze. No one breathed. They'd all heard rumors something unimaginable had happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But here, the truth arrived in their mother's handwriting. The corporal's eyes watered. He looked away. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words sounded absurd coming from the enemy's mouth. Historical records confirm it. Over 70 zero killed instantly in Nagasaki. Tens of thousands more in the weeks after. For the prisoners, The idea that the same flag flying above their camp had unleashed that destruction shattered what little they believed about justice. And yet the man delivering the news did it gently, like a priest performing last rites. One woman dropped to her knees. Another tore the letter in half, only to clutch the pieces back together moments later. Keiko didn't cry. She simply stared at the corporal's trembling hand and said quietly, "You told me my family is gone softly." That word, softly, stuck like a splinter in his conscience. That night the camp fell into a silence thicker than fear. For the first time, hatred began to blur into grief, shared, mirrored, and unspoken. The next evening, from somewhere near the barracks, a faint sound rose through the darkness, notes, voices, music. It began as a whisper, soft, uncertain, almost accidental. A few syllables hummed into the humid night air. Then another voice joined, trembling but steadying the first. By the second verse, even the guards stopped their patrols to listen. It wasn't defiance or nostalgia, it was survival, set to melody. From the barracks closest to the fence, Keiko's voice floated upward, carrying an old Japanese lullaby her mother used to hum during air raid nights. The other women followed, blending harmonies that didn't belong to soldiers or prisoners, just humans clinging to sound. Across the yard, the Allied mess hall radio buzzed faintly Benny Goodman, sing, sing, sing. One rhythm faded into another until the border between them dissolved. When the young British guard heard it, he hesitated, then placed his rifle against the wall and sat on an empty crate. He didn't understand the lyrics, but he recognized the grief. From his post-war journal, one line survived. They sang like they were mourning the sky itself. The camp commander didn't stop them. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he saw what the reports later confirmed. Camps that allowed nightly music hours saw disciplinary cases drop by nearly 40%. The choir became regulation, therapy disguised as morale, but for the women it was more personal. Every note carried ghosts of Nagasaki, of shame, of confusion that no speech could untangle. Keiko's lullaby faded into the next song, an English hymn the nurses had taught them, "Abide with me." The translation faltered, but the emotion didn't. One prisoner whispered, "We're singing their language." Nakamura replied quietly, "Maybe they're singing ours." By midnight, the camp was a strange harmony of enemies who no longer sounded like enemies. Even the guards hummed softly, out of tune but sincere. Beneath the same leaking roof, voices that had once sworn to destroy each other were keeping one another awake with melody instead of fear. But peace inside fences never lasts. 2 nights later, that fragile bridge would be tested when someone tried to burn it down not with fire, but with fury wearing an officer's insignia. The singing had barely faded when authority stormed back in. It came not through orders but through rage wearing medals. A captured Japanese lieutenant, once revered, now reduced to prisoner status, burst into the mess tent just before dawn. His uniform, though ragged, still carried its insignia. His face burned red with humiliation. Enough of this disgrace. He shouted in Japanese. The women froze, half-eaten rations in hand. He pointed at the Allied nurse who'd been distributing breakfast. "You bow to them, you sing with them, you shame the Empire." His voice cracked on that last word, part fury, part despair. No one replied. Keiko looked up slowly, her spoon still in midair. "The Empire is gone," she said softly. The sentence landed heavier than any blow. The officer crossed the room in 2 steps and spat at the nurse's boots. The entire camp seemed to hold its breath. Guards reached for their weapons, but the nurse didn't move. She simply wiped her boot with a rag, calm, composed, eyes steady. Her restraint made his anger look small, childlike. Historical logs from late 1945 show psychological breakdowns among captured Japanese officers spiking to nearly 1 in 5, as they grappled with the loss of authority and honor. Here it was, unfolding live rage built on the ruins of a vanished order. The lieutenant turned on the women. "You forget who you are," he hissed. "You eat their food, wear their clothes, and sing their songs." Nakamura stood. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like wire. "We haven't forgotten." she said. "We've remembered what being human feels like." That single line silenced him. Even the guards didn't move. For a moment, only the tin roof crackled under morning rain. The officer's shoulders slumped. He looked around, saw not traitors, but survivors, and without another word he walked out. That night the women gathered again. No orders, no fear, just a choice. They carried buckets of water to the bathhouse, the same one where humiliation had once begun. This time no one forced them. The decision they made that night would rewrite everything shame had taken. Moonlight poured across the camp like spilled milk, turning mud to silver. The women moved quietly, carrying metal buckets that clanked against the bamboo walkway. No guards ordered them this time, no loudspeakers barked commands. This was their decision, an act neither defiance nor obedience. Just reclamation. Steam rose again from the old bathhouse, the same one that had once felt like humiliation itself. Now, in the silence of night, it felt almost sacred. Keiko set down her bucket first. Nakamura followed, her expression unreadable. The others formed a circle, lighting a single lantern in the corner. Its flame flickered, catching faces that looked older than their years. They disrobed slowly, not because they had to, but because it was the only way to face what had happened. The first splash of water echoed like memory. Keiko whispered, this time no orders. Another woman answered, no shame. Inside Allied records, 1946 marked a turning point. Disciplinary violations among female Japanese POW dropped to near zero after the introduction of voluntary routines. Washing, writing, even singing. What the Allies had enforced by rule, the women had reclaimed by will. The bath became ritual. Soap and water turned into confession. They spoke quietly as they washed about families, lost cities, the way grief felt heavier in silence. One woman said, maybe we needed to be broken to see what's left. Another replied, maybe kindness breaks harder than war. Outside, the young British guard stood his usual post, hearing faint laughter drift through the night air, oft nervous free. He didn't intervene. He knew this wasn't rebellion, it was something closer to peace. When they stepped out, wrapped in rough towels, the dawn was just beginning to lift over the camp. For the first time, they didn't feel like prisoners. They felt like witnesses to something beyond survival. At roll call that morning, the commanding officer read new orders. All repatriation paperwork begins tomorrow, he announced. The women looked at one another, the word home landing like a question mark. After everything washed away, what waited beyond those gates would test them again, this time in peace. The sea smelled of rust and diesel. Manila Bay shimmered under a grey sunrise as the ships lined up hulking silhouettes waiting to take the prisoners home. The Japanese women stood on the pier, their few belongings packed in canvas sacks. Allied clerks called names from repatriation lists, one by one, as gulls circled overhead. Keiko held her papers tightly. Her fingers trembled, not from fear but disbelief. It was over. Behind her, the camp still buzzed with morning routine guards changing shifts, cooks preparing rations. The same sounds that once meant captivity now felt like strange comfort. For months, these routines had been their world. Leaving felt like walking out of a strange kind of safety. A British sergeant approached. Ship leaves in 20 minutes, he said. No hostility, no emotion, just fact. He handed Keiko a canteen and nodded toward the dock. She bowed slightly, a reflex she couldn't suppress. He hesitated, then unexpectedly bowed back. As they boarded, the women turned to face the shore. The guards stood in a loose formation, silent. Then, in an unspoken impulse, the prisoners straightened and saluted not to flags, but to faces, to the guards who hadn't hit them, to the nurses who had bandaged them, to the young sentry who had once looked away. Reports from Allied transport logs show over 100 Japanese women repatriated through Manila by March 1946, many escorted under Geneva supervision. For most, the journey home was quiet, almost surreal. On board, they received clean uniforms, simple meals, and blank notebooks. to write whatever they needed to forget. Keiko wrote only one line: "We saluted those who bathed us." As the ship's engines rumbled to life, the camp shrank into a blur of white tents and waving figures. Some women wept openly, others stared at the horizon in silence. Behind them lay a paradox captivity that had humanized them more than their own nation ever had. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and soap, reminders of everything left behind. Ahead waited Japan, ruins, judgment, and a home that might no longer recognize them. And when they arrived, they'd learn that freedom can sometimes feel colder than captivity. Japan looked smaller than they remembered. From the ship's deck, Keiko watched the coastline blur through a fog that smelled of ashes. The war had ended, but the air still carried its ghost-charred timbers, collapsed rooftops, the quiet of a country trying to forget itself. When they disembarked, no one cheered, no bands, no flags, just officials in grey uniforms stamping documents with blank faces. "Name," one clerk muttered, "Keiko Tanaka." She answered softly. He paused, glanced at the red POW mark on her file, and looked away. "Proceed." That single word told her everything. She wasn't returning as a citizen. She was returning as a stain. Tokyo's rubble whispered stories of survival, but not of compassion. Families of POW were told to remain discreet, to avoid embarrassing the nation. The Ministry of Welfare's 1946 directive labeled repatriated soldiers and workers as disgraced personnel, their honor suspended until further notice. For women, the shame doubled: captured, fed by the enemy, washed by foreign hands. Keiko reunited with her mother in a one-room shelter near Shinjuku. The old woman didn't ask questions, just served miso soup and stared at her daughter's uniform. "You survived," she said quietly. But when Keiko tried to describe the camp, the baths, the chocolate, the letters, her mother's face tightened. "Don't speak of it," she whispered. "People won't understand." Days blurred into months. The women met occasionally, discreetly, to trade scraps of news. Some found work as nurses again. Others married in silence, never revealing where they'd been. One, Lieutenant Nakamura, vanished completely. Rumors said she joined a clinic for war widows in Osaka, refusing to wear her uniform ever again. One winter night, Keiko sat alone on the tatami floor, unwrapping a tiny parcel she'd hidden through customs. Inside lay the folded note from the Allied officer: "Save it for tomorrow." She stared at it for a long time, then slipped it between the pages of her diary. She wrote beneath it, "Tomorrow never came, but I'm still clean." Decades would pass before anyone else read those words. Until then, their story would live underground, buried beneath the silence of survival. Autumn 1989. Tokyo had changed: neon lights, glass towers, the hum of an economy reborn from ashes. But inside an old wooden house on the city's edge, a granddaughter cleaning her grandmother's storage chest found something wrapped in yellowing cloth. A notebook faded, tied with string, pages brittle as memory. On the cover, Keiko Tanaka, 1945-46. She opened it gently. The first line stopped her cold. "They made us bathe together." The sentence sounded almost scandalous until she kept reading. Beneath it, page after page of delicate handwriting told everything Japan had never wanted to hear: the fear, the humiliation, the mercy, the chocolate, the music, the quiet healing that grew between captives and captors. Her grandmother had never spoken of the war. To the family, she'd simply been in service overseas. But here was proof of another truth, a record of decency surviving inside devastation. When the granddaughter translated the diary for a local museum, curators were skeptical. Then historians verified the names: the camp, the British medical unit. Every line matched archived reports. Today, that diary rests in the Tokyo Peace Museum, displayed under glass beside a note written in Keiko's later hand. "They made us bathe together, but what they washed away wasn't dignity. It was hate." Thousands raid it each year, many walking out in stunned silence. The granddaughter remembers the day of the exhibit's opening. A former British nurse attended, white-haired, frail, carrying her own faded photo from the same camp. She stood before the diary and whispered, "We only did what we were taught." Then she cried. For decades, official histories called the Pacific War a clash of steel and ideology. But this diary exposed something deeper, the quiet war fought between cruelty and conscience. It showed that mercy, when least deserved, could disarm entire armies of belief. As visitors file past the glass case, they pause at Keiko's last entry. "If peace means never hating again, then I surrendered happily." Outside the museum, Tokyo roars. Cars, voices, the pulse of a city that forgot and remembered all at once. What survives war isn't victory. It's humanity, written in a woman's hand, on a page that refused to burn.